Oh boy. If there was a kind of week in which the Bengals could annoy me more, frustrate fans more, depress fans more, I'm not sure it could have gone better than the past 3 days. I'm struggling here to stay positive. Try to maintain an active voice, maintain some sense of there's no positivity here. What am I talking about? First comment of the night. John, don't hold back. We'll try not to. This week has been interesting because entering Sunday, I didn't have a lot of thoughts on the game about what was going to happen in the game, I should say. I think the one thing that I didn't expect was for it to unfold the way that it did in terms of being shut out at home. I think in general, the day went about as worse or as bad as it possibly could have in terms of the results, in terms of what people were saying about them. Turns up Zach Moss being the latest person associated with the Bengals to call them the bottom of the barrel. And everything that is entailed with that. But during the game, I tweeted out, and for those joining on Twitter, welcome. For those watching on TikTok, welcome. Hop on over to YouTube or Facebook so I can see your comments and I can read them off maybe at the end of the stream here. But I said during the game that, if the season ends here today, which it did, obviously, the Bengals were eliminated from playoff contention with a 0-24 loss to the Baltimore Ravens. And these final 3 games do not matter in the grand scheme of things outside of pride and professionalism. But if the season did end today, and they were to, run it back in 2026, what would the message be? What would the message to the fans, the message to the players, the message to everyone involved in the operation, everyone who's invested time, energy, money, whatever the case may be, what is the message in terms of how 2026 can be better and to leave not just 2025 in the past, but 2024 and 2023? 3 years without going to the playoffs when Joe Burrow is your quarterback is pretty damn asinine if we're just keeping it a buck. What would the message be about how the last 3 years, how many games is that? 51? About to be 51. How the last 51 games are not going to be repeated. If you're not going to make any changes, if you're not going to fire Zac Taylor, if you're not going to bring in a new coaching staff, if you're not going to make any notable changes to the personnel department, whether that's the guy who's leading it or keeping the guy who's leading it but having him in a different role and bringing in someone with a more direct responsibility to run the entire football operations. Whatever the case may be, if you're not going to do any of that, what is the message in terms of going forward and how to be better? I don't think there is one. And I think after today, in which there was but basically an analysis piece ran by the Athletics' Paul Daniel Jr., citing and just basically overlaying the expectations and the current temperature for the likes of Zac Taylor, Duke Tobin, Al Golden, the major players about how this season of inordinate failure, how they are going to be judged, and if they are going to be back in 2026. And basically right now, at 4-10, it's essentially, no, all 3 are probably going to be back. Probably. Not guaranteed, not confirmed. But if 4-10 and losing in an embarrassing fashion at home in a must-win game to keep your playoff hopes alive, in a game in which you're clearly just despondent and detached quarterback is not himself, all of that, run it back. We can't pin this on Zach. We can't pin this on Duke. We can't pin this on Al. So there are no consequences. There are no consequences to this abject failure that you're seeing today. The consequences are going to be placed upon some players, obviously, who aren't going to be starting next year. That's not anything special in terms of an NFL team going through the motions of of a failed season, though. Roster turnover happens every single year, regardless how successful the past season was. There is no message in terms of how this gets better. And even if there was, it's not a message that anyone could reasonably believe. I'm trying to think of the next thing that I want to say here, because long before Joe Burrow came to town to Cincinnati, the belief about who the Bengals are as an organization has been very, very clear. And that's why I still, 48 hours later, am thinking about what Zach Moss said. Zach Moss, of all people, called the Bengals the worst sports franchise of them all. I'm paraphrasing, but the worst franchise in sports. Again, this is not necessarily something new in terms of what a former player has said, or just not even a former Bengals player, just anyone within the NFL. This is not a new belief about the Bengals. It's been going on for 3 decades now, going back to the 90s, going back to before I was born. I was born in 1996, by the way. So there was at least 5 years of incompetence of the Mike Brown-led Bengals before I was even alive. For a long time, for as long as I've been alive, the Bengals, by a lot of people, have been believed to be a piss-poor poverty franchise. But like the standard does not exist within those 4 walls of that stadium. And I'm thinking about Zach Moss, of all people, saying this. And how Zach Moss was only on the team for 15 months. He signed a 2-year, $8 million contract. He played in 8 games before realizing that his neck broke in 3 different places. Before he or the team realized it, they shut him down for the rest of the season. He was unable to practice all throughout the offseason workout program, and he wasn't even able to start in training camp. He was on the non-football injury list for 8 days before he was released. And long before this release, he ended up being forced to take a pay cut, or a reworked contract that lowered his cap hit, lowered his salary, and gave him about $375,000 in upfront guaranteed money, which is basically like compromising and say, hey, like, you're not worth as much as we think that you are. And as a result, we're going to pay you less, but we're going to give you more money up front as a way to like balance it out. As far as we know, that is the worst thing that happened to Zach Moss. The fact that he had to take a pay cut, and then because he wasn't able to play football at that point, it was like 10 and a half months after he originally suffered his broken neck, he still wasn't able to play football. And that's why he was released. That is the worst thing that we know happened to Zach Moss. He was there for, again, 15 months. He is not the first player to get cut by the Bengals. He will not be the last player to get cut by the Bengals. Plenty of other players who have been in his shoes have not had the gumption and the balls to willingly admit on Twitter that this is the worst franchise in sports. He was there for, again, 15 months. What in God's name did he see? Did he witness? Was he subjected to? Or what happened that allowed that? You know what I'm trying to say. What did he see? What did he witness that instilled that belief within him? Because if he's getting that opinion after having to take a pay cut and then getting released, I think that's a little harsh. But again, this is not something new. This is just the latest person to say it. But again, this is not a franchise legend by any means. This is not Corey Dillon or TJ Hushmanzada or Carson Palmer saying this. Guys who were there for multiple years, who've done several great things for the organization. They are not like Zach Moss, in which Zach Moss doesn't necessarily have anything to stand on to say this. But yet, Zach Moss, for only being there for about a year, felt really comfortable saying that, reinforcing the belief that's been there for 30 years. And that's why I can't get it out of my head. Because on days like today, where it's like there's no explaining why the Bengals are doing what they're doing, or in this case, what they're not doing what they're doing, how am I, who is trying to look at this from as an objective of a lens as possible, how are fans who are trying to rationalize how they can continue investing time, effort, and money into supporting and following the team, how is anybody in this position, how is anybody comfortable in saying that Zach Moss is wrong? Again, what did he witness in just a year's time 4, 5, 6 years into the Joe Burrow era, in which supposedly the franchise had made a lot of positive evolutions. What did he see that instilled that belief? And why is this belief still being permeated again several years after this franchise has supposedly taken several leaps forward? They've been to a Super Bowl. They have a Ring of Honor. They have a blown up indoor practice facility. They have a bunch of new amenities. They have more offices. They have more staff. They've taken small steps and progresses. And yet still, this is something that is accepted, that this franchise is below second rate. It's in the basement of not just the NFL, but in professional sports. Zach Moss has only been on one other team, the Indianapolis Colts. He's 28 years old. He very likely could, again, play in the NFL. It's on days like today in which it's just really hard to push back against that sentiment. Again, referring to the very likely news that Zac Taylor, Duke Tobin, and Al Golden will all be retained in 2026. Going back before the season even began, Zac Taylor, for as far as we knew, had only 2 years left on his contract entering 2025. Because, as we all know, he signed a 5-year contract after the Bengals went to and then lost the Super Bowl. And that contract paid him about $4.5 million a year, which is very low in the spectrum of coaching salaries. But I remember talking about it with a lot of people saying that I don't think that this year is like a do or die year for Zac Taylor because of that, right? Assuming that the Bengals, finish around 500, just like they had been in the past couple of years, assuming they don't like bottom out and don't look completely embarrassing, I don't think this is the year that Zac gets fired. But as the year went on and the more embarrassing that they got, and the fact that the defensive coordinator that he hired and he's now joined at the hip to is a complete abject failure from a season-long standpoint, then yeah, that belief for me personally started to turn in the other direction and how like this could actually happen, in which this whole thing could be over in terms of Zac's tenure. And that was before it came to light that, according to Paul Dehner Jr., Zac signed another contract a year after he signed the first contract, because the Bengals made the AFC Championship game for a second year in a row. They didn't win that game, obviously, but it was enough to get him another 5-year contract, which is actually the contract that he's been under for the last 3 years. So 2026 is not his last year. 2027 is his last year. And that is just, okay, I mean, this is 2 years now left remaining on Zac's deal. This is an organization that, regardless of anything, is not going to fire a head coach when he's got 2 years left of guaranteed salary left to earn. It's just not going to happen, regardless of how embarrassing they are. They were embarrassing many times in the Marvin Lewis era. And Marvin Lewis was fired with a year left on his deal after he signed a 2-year extension after the end of 2017. Marvin Lewis was under contract through the 2019 season, but obviously didn't see anything past the first couple of days of the 2019 calendar year. That's why the conversation around Zac was, I think, as hot as it's ever been in the past month or so, because everyone assumed that 2026 would be his last year, and the Bengals have kept the secret for 3 years. It's not standard practice necessarily for teams to announce new contracts for their coaches. However, it is very, very odd that they never announced this at all, or it never got reported on for, again, almost 3 years. An example is the Green Bay Packers extended Matt LaFleur, extended their GM, extended their executive vice president during the 2022 offseason, very early in the 2022 offseason, and it didn't get reported on until like July of that year. That was an example pointed out by Wendell Fiera of A to Z Sports, who covers the Green Bay Packers for us, amazing writer for the Packers. Again, like, it's not uncommon for these contracts to kind of go under the radar, but 3 years? 3 years it's a really weird secret for the Bengals to not necessarily announce. The fact that they just came off of an incredibly successful 2-year run, and like, hey, like, we extended Zac again. Okay, like, that probably would have been useful to know for a lot of people. And I think if any team should be pushed for the sake of transparency, it should be the Bengals, right? A team that proclaims to be this family-owned operation that cares about the community. You would think that they would want people to kind of be in the know about some of these things, and they would be proud again of the recent success that they had that justified giving Zac that extra year. I really don't know why they didn't do it, but it probably would have saved us a lot of time about whether or not his job was actually under any sort of scrutiny, if he was actually under any pressure this year at all. It kind of seemed like in the past couple of weeks after the losses to Buffalo and Baltimore that he looked a little bit despondent, like especially against Buffalo. But I don't think that he's even remotely under pressure right now, knowing that I have this team by the balls for the next at least year because they're not going to fire me and pay me when I'm not doing anything in 2027, regardless of where he goes after, his time with the Bengals ends, if his time with the Bengals ends. But that's another thing that I kind of want to get to as well. Marvin Lewis never went more than 3 years without making the playoffs with the Bengals. If you want to compare timelines a little bit, Marvin Lewis obviously missed the playoffs in 06, 07, and 08 after winning the AFC North in 2005. And winning the AFC North in 2009 probably gave him the opportunity to have that mini reset following the 2010 season. If we are here exactly a year from now and the Bengals still have only 4 wins and they're on the outside looking in for the playoffs again, that's going to be 4 straight years in which Zac doesn't make the playoffs with the Bengals. If Marvin Lewis can't get 4 years without a play of no playoffs, that I really don't know how Zac can. And I really don't know how, again, this team can sell that something different is going to happen with all the new faces back. The whole offseason mantra is going to be doing things differently with the same people. But the same people have kind of been in that building for the last 30 years, no? I mean, Duke has been here since 99. The GM is still technically Mike Brown. Katie has been here for the entire time. Her power has just only increased. Again, there's not going to be any major changes with the coaching staff. A coaching staff who probably heavily believes in their process. Doing things differently, but with the same people, has been the message for basically the entire Mike Brown era of the Bengals. Because changes of the people rarely happen. Coaching changes rarely happen, or they happen far too late than compared to when they should. There is nothing that they can sell about how they can change without actually bringing in new faces. That's the whole reason why moving on from Marvin Lewis was so critical when it happened. The Bengals made a Super Bowl 3 years later, regardless of the quality of the head coach. Change for the sake of change can be great. It can be exactly what a franchise needs, especially when things get stale. There is stale bread that is more edible right now than what the Bengals are. It hasn't been 16 years, obviously, with Zac, but these last 3 years feel like a long time. There's just so much that's frustrating right now. There's just so much that I think rightfully angers. Because again, I just don't know what you can take away from this season. Well, what was the point of this season? It was just a failure. It was a failure in which no one is going to face any consequences. It's just a big middle finger to everyone who followed along. It's not just this one-off failure either. It's, again, 3 consecutive years of not being good enough, of not sustaining success for really the 3rd time around with another quarterback. I do kind of want to get to some questions here in a little bit. But the title of this video, the Bengals are falling even further behind the NFL. The reason why I titled it that is because I think it's very fitting in terms of who is leading the pack in the NFL right now. If you were to look at the playoff picture, the number 1 seed in the AFC is the Denver Broncos. Right behind them are the New England Patriots and Jacksonville Jaguars. And the NFC, obviously the Rams are number 1, but the Bears are the 2nd seed. four of those teams I just mentioned, the Broncos, Patriots, Jags, and Bears, have all done things recently that very much indicate that those franchises are willing to not only emulate what other successful teams in recent memory have done, but they're trying to do differently or take different steps to get ahead of the game. The New England Patriots obviously have gone through 3 head coaches now in the last 3 years. Obviously, one of them being Bill Belichick. And I don't necessarily love what they did with Gerard Mayo and the sham of the hiring process that brought in Mike Vrabel. But in just 1 year, the New England Patriots brought in the right head coach for the job. And with a quarterback that they believe in, they are now 11-3 and on pace to take back the AFC East. The Jacksonville Jaguars made this aggressive push to hire Liam Cohen and bring in a fresh, young, new name in James Gladstone for the general manager position. Again, with a quarterback that they believe in, that they want to continue building around. And they have completely turned that team around and that roster around. A roster that I don't think a lot of people really expected to be as good as it is. It's giving very much 2021 Bengals vibes a little bit down in Jacksonville, which is why I'm definitely interested in seeing what they do in the playoffs. But again, just a simple, drastic, and aggressive offseason filled with change can completely change the trajectory of your franchise. The Chicago Bears went out and got Ben Johnson and built around everything that he believes in, right? They didn't hire a new GM, but they basically attached this GM to Ben Johnson. And again, did everything in their power to build around his vision and to unite under that vision. And wouldn't you know, in a division that was expected to be extremely competitive this year in the AFC North, the Chicago Bears are ahead of the pack. The Philadelphia Eagles, for all of their faults and their warts with their injuries this year, are still one of the best run organizations in the NFL and knows how to sustain success, along with the Los Angeles Rams. The Bears, the Rams, and the Eagles are atop the NFC right now. It's very fitting that in a year in which the Bills are struggling to keep up, the Chiefs are obviously going to be out of the playoffs, the Ravens are just completely up and down. The powers that be that the Bengals have had to compete with in recent years are all struggling. And it was a great opportunity for the Bengals to take over and to kind of fill the vacancies of that power. And they are watching all these other teams pass them by in the NFL. And instead of trying to keep up or trying to take the next steps to get ahead of them, they are falling even further behind in the hierarchy of the NFL. And by keeping the core powers at play here, the core decision makers that are going to define what this team is for not just next year, 2027 probably as well, because God knows that it would be great to see some type of a 1-year overhaul and to have that overhaul lead to instant success. But the one time that we kind of saw that in recent memory in 2019 for the Bengals, it led to one of their worst years in franchise history. One of my friends on Twitter, Joel Chandler, basically said that the best case scenario now is that, if they fire Zach after 2026, the new head coach comes in 2027, it becomes a lost year. And then this Super Bowl window potentially reopens in 2028. And by that time, Joe Burrow's 32, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are in their late 20s. And that's like the next reasonable year that you can expect the Bengals to even consider being in the Super Bowl conversation. All these other teams, though. I mean, I didn't even break down the Broncos, right? They obviously spend a pretty penny on a proven head coach in Sean Payton, and they're very rich and wealthy owners. I've utilized every avenue to inject money into the organization, hired a real GM, and have completely rebuilt that team. And now they're atop the AFC. All these other things, all these other factors, all these other variables, these avenues of getting better and being competitive, not just competitive, but being successful, are giving examples to the Bengals about what they should do. And by refusing to do that, by remaining inside the walls of your own arrogance, the Bengals are falling behind even further than they already were. They are already so far behind the other teams that are struggling this year. They are light years behind the teams that are succeeding. It's a shame, but I think it's very poetic for what this team is and what this team is probably going to be going forward. I do want to get to some comments here. I see all you guys on YouTube and Facebook, on TikTok. We're about 250 strong on TikTok, 516 total watching this, going on 25 minutes. We're going to be here for a little bit longer. Cincy Fan Jungle City 9871 says this whole secret extension crap is all just a lie to keep Zac and to save money. Uh Saving money, yeah, probably. I don't know if it's a lie though. I very much believe in Paul Dehner Jr.'s reporting. I think he is I think he is the standard in terms of Bengals reporters. He's definitely got an ear in with the organization. Most of his information is very rock solid. He's got a good pulse in the organization. So anything that he says and reports on, I tend to believe it. Maisha says, need a Dan Campbell or variable ex-player type head coach just to mix it up. Yeah, like even if they were to get a new head coach, like that's the conversation that's obviously not going to be had this year. But if it were to be had next year, you have to look at how Zac Taylor was even brought into the first place. Someone who was obviously looking to make a name for himself, someone who didn't have a lot of experience and therefore couldn't command a very high salary. I think Dan Campbell, if he didn't already sign a new contract with the Lions, he's going to sign a new contract and it's going to, reflect the quality of the head coach that he is now. Mike Vrabel obviously could command a pretty high salary for what he did in Tennessee, and is obviously well known within the Patriots. It doesn't seem like paying a head coach is like that big of an issue because in the grand scheme of things, it's nothing more than paying like a second rate, veteran free agent. But still, it's an area in which the Bengals don't splurge, and they probably should. But more important than anything, a type of head coach like a Mike Vrabel who really likes to have a lot of influence in just the overall operations of the football side of things, not just from the coaching staff, but also in the personnel department. Someone, like even Bill Belichick, right? When there was rumors about, could the Bengals hire Bill Belichick? Like Belichick obviously instills a program wherever he is, and the Bengals just never want that kind of personality and kind of running the team. Like they obviously trust Zac to make a plethora of decisions on the football side of things, but they still want at the end of the day a glorified yes man who just kind of abides to the way that they do business and just someone who just kind of stays in his own lane. And you just have to get really lucky in terms of finding the right person who can just maximize what he's given. And clearly that's just not Zac Taylor at this point in time. Ken Snyder 6633 asks, no reporter has asked it, but do you think anything changes when Mike Tice? I know he stepped back, quote unquote, but there's no way he isn't involved in day-to-day decisions, let alone large ones. Morbid, but fair, considering the fact that he is 90. Right now, Katie Blackburn essentially runs the Bengals. You could say that Mike may have the final say on a handful of things, right? But the most important decisions that the Bengals make basically goes through the office of Katie Blackburn. That's why there isn't a GM here, because she finalizes like the big important contracts. Obviously, Chase and Higgins and Burrow would not have happened without her signature. It's not a GM's doing. And like the future of the team, like the big organizational decisions, like those are more or less hers to make, because that's what it's going to be, when Mike has moved on, when he's passed. Obviously, Mike is still there and he still likes to, kind of chime in when needed. And he still likes to be a part of the day to day because of, attending practices and keeping these relationships with these players and whatnot, and still talking to Zac, because at the end of the day, he's still the president and the owner. But this has all been building towards Katie just taking over everything. And to be honest with you, it's just not that much different compared to Mike. He is the one who raised her after all. And it's why that, for the last 30 years, they haven't wanted anyone from the outside of the organization butting into their business. They're very much laissez faire. And I don't think that belief has dwindled with the dynamic that Mike and Katie share. Now we all know why Burrow has been upset. Yeah, I mean, I think that part of it is the dysfunction of the team, or just the decline of the team has weighed on him a little bit. I also think that he is very hard on himself, and that's kind of what's made him into the player that he is today. And when he realizes that he's been off the field for a long time and he hasn't necessarily pulled his weight to make sure that the team is as good as possible, and when he has games like he had against on Sunday, he's not going to look at anything else except, who's staring back at him at the mirror. And I do think that he has a good relationship with Zach. I do think that Zach empowers him to kind of just do what he wants as a quarterback, as the leader of the offense. And I do think that him championing, obviously, for both Chase and Higgins to come back, and the team responding with that along with Gesicki, I do think that that has Burrow. It incentivizes him to at least support the figureheads of the team, at least this year. So I'm not sure that there's this disconnect between Burrow and the team, and I'm not sure that the team's dysfunction is completely weighing on Burrow and why he's been, clearly depressed over the past week or so. But excuse me. Yeah, it's something to think about though in the totality of things. John, I'm done if they both come back. I mean, yeah, I'll end on this. Like, people all of my life have told me who the Bengals are at their core, just an organization that just doesn't care. They just cash a check. They're just business people at heart. They're lawyers. I mean, they literally are lawyers. They graduated from Ivy League schools, Dartmouth, and like that's just kind of how they handle business. They love precedent, and they do not back down in negotiations, and they run it with an iron fist. And they do not like people from the outside, again, telling them what to do, criticizing them. If they do get criticized, they get petty with it. If they have any semblance of success, or if they even for the slightest chance prove people wrong, it's probably silly to believe that one quarterback could make all that go away, that could make them progress completely in the right direction. I'm just saying how it is. If their way has not worked for 35 years, what is to say that it's all of a sudden going to change? If you're not going to bring in new people to make different decisions, then you have to assume that the same people are going to make the same decisions, because no one can tell them otherwise. No one except you or me. No one except the people who ultimately contribute to the money that they make. I do think that there is part of them that cares about the empty seats. I do think there's part of them that cares about their rivals besting them, embarrassing them. I know for a fact that Mike Brown does not like losing to the Browns. I've heard all my life about people going away from the team, and I've seen people go away from the team, and I've seen people come back. And it's not a fun topic to have, especially for someone who covers the team. But it's really hard to sell you something that I don't believe in, and I don't believe in the direction of this team. And I'll end with this. I remember saying to someone back in the summer that the only way that the Bengals win is when they get lucky, is when everything kind of clicks and goes in their favor, and the decisions that they make, not based off of any sound process, but based off of what they believe is right. When those decisions somehow pay off and success can be found in a spark of a bottle, that is when they can find the same success that the other teams who do things the right way, who move forward the right way, who evolve the right way, and who can see where things are trending in terms of financially, in terms of player evaluation, in terms of everything that makes the engine go. That is when they can match up with everyone else. And it doesn't happen very often. It may only happen every 30 years. But if it happened once, then the Bengals believe that it can happen again. And I suppose that's the message to all of you, that if it did happen once, then it may be able to happen again. But unfortunately, like it is with this team, it's just going to have to be a surprise. I think I'm going to end the live stream there, but I thank all of you for tuning in. We're up to well over 600 people for 35 minutes. I believe this is our longest live stream of our now 3 live streams for A to Z Sports Cincinnati. I'm John Sheeran. Good night.